disappearing all the time. It keeps melting before our eyes. I see towers where there were trees. The character named Old Lady in Stephen Sondheim and James Lapine's Pulitzer-winning musical Sunday in the Park with George saw the climate crisis coming before we ever did. As unfortunate climate records are broken consistently and new reports of failing ecosystems and extinct species are disseminated, I wonder how my livelihood, the art of making art, plays a part. Does theater making aid in destruction or restoration? Am I preserving the green world Old Lady so clearly sees in 1884? The answer is a resounding no. I'm a dramaturg, which means I study theater criticism, history, literature, and theory, and I use those studies to advocate for playwrights and audiences. After doing this for 9 years, I've had to add the planet to my advocacy list, and it is only through this musical that I've discovered this. It seems obvious. There is no theater if there is no planet. And yet, the theater industry produces literal tons of waste each year in fabrics, metal, and lumber, disregarding the impact it has on the planet upon which it works and whose resources it uses. In May of 2022, Point One and Indigo Limited found that 77% of audience members agree that cultural organizations have a responsibility to influence society to make radical change to address the climate emergency. If over 3/4 of our audiences believe this so fiercely, shouldn't theaters be responding with action? Some are, by making greener theater, energy-efficient washers and lighting systems, recycling programs, and generally trying to stay paper-free. However, what our audiences are calling for is for us to influence them to make radical changes. This pushes the impetus for change in the theater back to my part of the process before we ever send it to the shops. Theaters should be evaluating scripts for the messaging they are putting out into the world by reading with an environmental lens before we push it into production. What does the play one has chosen or been assigned to produce say, even subliminally, about the great character Mother Earth? How do the characters on the stage interact with her, mourn her, feed her? It is our responsibility to head to the text and search out statements we may be passively making about the planet, and instead make them active and intentional. Now, the seminal musical Sunday in the Park with George, sometimes called Sunday in the Park or simply Sunday, is about the life and legacy of the artist Georges Seurat and his most famous painting, A Sunday Afternoon on the Island of Le Grand Jatte. The musical and the painting both rely heavily on visual illusions. Act 1 creates a clear picture of Ile de Le Grand Jatte and mirrors the painting which inspires it all in 1884, while Act 2 jumps 100 years into the future, first into the Art Institute of Chicago, where the painting now hangs, before returning to the namesake island. Through the opening lines and some very impressive scenery changes, the character George builds the entire playing space of Ile de Le Grand Jatte before the audience's very eyes. It is a luscious world with a grassy green expanse and streaming golden lights through the trees. And the audience is led to believe that George's very words conjure this image, as if he is some sort of god in the act of creation of the world. It is not long, though, before this god turns on his creation. By page 2, he is done creating, and by page 3, he is amending his creation by feverishly erasing a tree which flies out of the space as he proclaims, "I hate this tree." This first moment with the tree not only shows us where George stands in his opinion as to whether or not the world is his to manipulate, but it also has negative ripple effects, which are shown in the disgruntled characters around him. One of Sunday in the Park with George's major themes is legacy. What will be left behind? And the musical gives us the answers of children and art. With a green lens, we can ask, what impact of our actions on the environment will be left behind? And which characters are concerned about that? Our titular George clearly is not. Interestingly, old lady, George's mother, stands opposed to her son. I began to zoom in on her in my dissection of the script. She is the singular voice who takes an active stance against George's destruction of the environment. Early on in Act 1, she is disheartened by the clearing of trees in a plot of land across the Seine for the coming Eiffel Tower, which she used to love to admire from underneath her own tree. She sings, "It keeps changing. I see towers where there were trees, disappearing all the time when things were beautiful." Messaging lamenting the loss of the environment in the name of progress does not get much clearer. Old lady is watching industrialization take over the green earth she loves so well, and only the past is labeled beautiful. She begs her son, "Quick, draw it all, Georgie, disappearing as we look." While there is ample evidence and opportunity to amplify the environmental conservation messaging of Sunday in the Park with George, the most haunting lies in the final scene. At the top of the scene, the stage directions read, "The island is once again revealed, though barely recognizable, as the trees have been replaced by high-rise buildings." George, the great-grandson of George Seurat, sings, "George looks around. He sees the park. It is depressing. He is afraid and sees it dying." As the scene continues, more and more of the characters from Act 1, the people of Ile de la Grangeat, take their place. Those who were once surrounded by the beauty of the natural world are now surrounded by metal and glass. The picture is marred. However, the buildings then begin to rise because it cannot be these characters' perfect park with these obtrusions. As old lady told us all along, the island is enough on its own. And George is unable to see this beauty. But with these buildings, it does not hold the balance that George Seurat hoped to capture in his art. Though the final scene can be read very drearily due to lack of appreciation and outright erasure of the environment, there is still optimism. Yes, there are towers where there once were beautiful trees, but Sunday in the Park with George signals a glimmer of hope. After old lady is disappointed in George's ability to see the beauty of the island, he adds, "But the air is rich and full of light," to which she affirms, "Good." It is this moment that signals to us that George has changed and is able to appreciate the island for what it is as itself without the manipulation of it or use of its resources. And that old lady finally approves. There is a future for us, for the planet, for the island. So you've seen the musical, at least in brief. Now what? What part do you play as an audience member? Today I ask that you hold us accountable. Public accountability is one of the most revolutionary forces in the theater industry, and it has been throughout its history. But before that, before you ask us the tough questions at the Q&A sessions, on social media, in the lobby, before you ask us what we are doing to care for the planet, I want you to put on your green lenses when you show up to the theater. When you watch A Raisin in the Sun or Death of a Salesman, I want you to take note of every mention of land, water, and sky. I want you to take it seriously. What does it mean that in A Raisin in the Sun, the only representation of the natural world is one plant in the windowsill that Mama Younger struggles to keep alive? What does it mean that salesman Willie Loman's last purchase before his death is seeds he can't possibly plant? What does that do to the story being told? How does that affect you? It is my hope today that the case study of the non-science play, Sunday in the Park with George, can inspire others to put on their green lenses, to look for where else we might be missing dramatists calling us to task within the pages, where else we might be missing towers where there were trees. I also hope that we, as a theater industry, can begin considering the planet when we are so ingrained in creating anew each time we begin, and instead put intentional focus on influencing society to provide enough for all forever. Thank you.